Hey all, here are OS Reviews. Today we're taking a quick look at the Bang & Olufsen Beosound Explore. This is a compact Bluetooth speaker which is the most affordable model from this Danish hi-fi brand, which has an emphasis on clean, minimalistic design, positioned as more of a luxury, high-end brand. Some of their bigger speakers, which also can act as kind of an art statement in your house, do look really distinctive from a design perspective, almost like a statue or a modern art sculpture. Interestingly, this company has also made some televisions in the past, as well as phones, both conventional ones that you plug into the phone line, as well as collaborated with Samsung on making certain cell phones in the past, such as in the early 2000s, there was the Bang & Olufsen Serene. Another model was called the Serenata that was almost like an iPod, but you can also use it to make phone calls. Again, a huge emphasis on just looking unique. Although in recent years, it seems that they have started to widen their product catalog, collaborating with more brands, including on lots of HP laptops. There is some audio tuning done by B&O. So compared to the past, the cost of entry to getting a B&O product seems to have lowered quite a lot. And again, the Bang & Olufsen Beosound Explore is another example. This Bluetooth speaker retails for $200, which is still on the pricier side for Bluetooth speakers, but it often goes on sale during the holiday season for around half of that. So with the street price of being sub $100, it becomes a lot more reasonable, and I was just curious to see whether this provided better audio quality compared to many of the cheaper, more generic speakers that we have seen in the past. Even glancing at it, you can tell some of the design traits that have carried over from some of their legacy speakers, even on a smaller model like this, and it comes in a variety of different colors, including a emerald green. And there's even a red-colored edition, which is a collaboration with Ferrari, the racing car brand. So that's an interesting special edition of the same speaker. B&O touts this as also a good travel or camping companion because it is very rugged. It's going to be water resistant as well. So if you get it wet, drop it into a pool, it should still survive. It's just a little bit larger than a soda can. We'll take a closer look at that in a moment. And it also has an optional companion app that you can use to further tweak some of these settings. Produces 360-degree sound, and battery lasts up to 27 hours before you have to recharge it again in under an hour and a half. Weighs in at around 630 grams or 1.3 pounds, and it also has an optional TWS stereo mode like many of the other newer Bluetooth speakers that we've seen. So if you purchase two of them, you can connect them simultaneously and get more of a stereo separation effect. I will say though that it does not necessarily have the most advanced audio codecs. For example, it doesn't explicitly state LDAC or aptX support, and that means the Bluetooth transmission process isn't necessarily going to be truly hi-fi grade on this more entry-level model from them. It seems to rely on standard SBC and AAC, which is perfectly fine, but again, it would just lose perhaps a little bit of detail through the transmission process, although the actual drivers and speakers inside should still be tuned to sound quite good. So anyways, we have on the inside basically just the speaker itself, which is interestingly covered in a bit of a silicone on the very top and bottom, maybe just for protection when you are traveling. So in some way, it kind of is a reusable, almost like a case for the speaker. However, do note that when you have the silicone part popped on, you aren't able to charge the speaker at the same time. So you have to peel this off if you want to reveal the USB Type-C port there at the bottom. Other quick packaging contents include just a quick user guide, as well as a USB Type-C charging cable branded by B&O, as well as a clip that you can use to, again, attach this onto a backpack if you are traveling and on the go. And now just taking a closer look at the design, it definitely has a pretty reassuring weight to it, considering the entire thing is constructed out of aluminum alloy, has a good heft. You can kind of see the fabric coverings for the actual speakers or drivers there on the inside. And it's interesting because on one hand, I feel like having lots of these small grooves can collect a little bit of dust or sand if you are really going outdoors. But on the other hand, because it is a waterproof speaker, you could always just dunk in a little bit of fresh water to rinse it off. That being said, a completely flat surface might have been a little easier to wipe down, but it is what it is. Very bottom here just features some soft touch texture already to it that makes it easy to stand onto a table without really sliding or moving around. And then on the very top, we have controls, including the power, play pause, as well as volume, and there's also a pairing key at the very top. Now, the keys themselves do feel relatively tactile and responsive, although this model does not have a built-in microphone, so you can't really use it as a speakerphone for answering calls, for example. I will also mention that on the inside, there are technically two drivers, aka speakers, which are 1.8 inches in diameter. along with two 30-watt amplifiers inside, so it can fill a space of up to 300 feet squared in their recommended guide, which is actually quite decent for a small speaker like this. And the drivers are described as full range, so it covers the entire frequency spectrum, including handling the bass, mids, and trebles, as opposed to having a dedicated subwoofer for added bass, for example, that we tend to see on larger boombox-style speakers for even more added oomph. But again, for a smaller unit like this, it's kind of expected. We'll take a closer look, of course, at the sound later on. The very back here just includes that clip. Here's also how it stacks up against a standard soda can, just for reference. So you can tell that the diameter here is going to be a little bit wider, but in terms of height, it's not too far off, which means that you can pop this onto a cup holder in the car for the most part, as well as to pop it into a water bottle holder onto a backpack if you don't want to clip it on. So definitely not the largest speaker in the world. That being said, it should still provide much louder and more satisfying sound as compared to on a smartphone speaker, which would be still much smaller at the end of the day. Audible click there as confirmation. This is a universal app for all of their products, so you can also tell what they currently have in their catalog from larger speakers, television sets, including the Beosound Explore over here. And once you have location services turned on, it will detect the presence of the speaker nearby automatically. You can then tap on pair. It is a pretty seamless and fast process. We can also color coordinate to the specific model that we have. You can rename the speaker if desired in terms of how it will show up under your Bluetooth settings in the future. And now we are finished. So with the Beosound Explore here, we can tap inside to take a look at the battery percentage remaining, as well as further down below, we can change some of the equalizer modes. There is a optimal default, speech for TV shows, podcasts, as well as conferences, party, which is going to be just a little bit more bright and energetic, although you can also tap inside to further curate the specific sound that you're looking for. For example, again, being a little bit more energetic versus more of a warm sound versus more bright, more relaxed. Kind of an interesting, more subjective way of describing sound, and it's making it a little easier to understand what these are corresponding to. For example, between relaxed and warm, it says low trebles, which means it's not going to be quite as piercing in terms of the highs, and then between relaxed and bright, it will be also a little bit lower in terms of bass, versus bright and energetic, it might be higher trebles, and then energetic and warm will be high bass. But if you don't want to save it as a profile for referencing in the future, you can just tap on the last icon here for you to bring up the slider that won't be saved, but will just allow you to play around with it when you're currently listening to the music. The position of these tiles can also be rearranged, and up top we can also check if there's any firmware updates to push over to the speaker. And last but not least, the two tabs on the very bottom here allow you to play back music directly from the app. The middle tab here is actually an integration with Deezer Music. You can think of this as an alternative to something like Amazon Music or Spotify, but they just have a partnership with B&O, although you can always use other third-party apps of your choice, since it now just acts as a Bluetooth speaker. Just exit the app and you can play back whatever audio is coming from your phone. Now the final tab here though also gives you some free internet radio stations, also kind of an interesting integration via this app, but you can also search for a specific type of music, different channels to discover music, and then stream it back via the speaker here. So the app is simple but easy to use. Mostly it's just there for the equalizers that you can control and set up, although interestingly there isn't really a classic frequency sliders that we've seen in many other companion apps in the past. So this is going to be a little bit more easy to use, I suppose, especially for folks that may not be exclusively audiophiles, since everything is described using words. Although arguably you get a little less control as a result in terms of granularity. Nonetheless, it works quite well. Let's do a quick demo here of music playback. This is using the default audio tuning. We'll crank up the volume here. Turn things down there, as well as playing and pausing the sound. You can tell it definitely works. There is a split-second delay there, but overall not too bad. It is using a pretty up-to-date Bluetooth 5.2 driver, so if you're using it for watching some TV shows or YouTube clips, it still seems to be serviceable. Although do note that this model does not have a wired mode that you can access using 3.5mm aux, which would have been, I think, nice to have as a optional second mode to completely get rid of any latency at all, but it is what it is. The overall sound quality, though, I think is relatively impressive. It definitely is very clean sounding, as well as the 360-degree sound seems to be a very accurate claim. You can try covering it up as well as rotating it, and the sound is actually quite evenly dispersed regardless of where you're standing, which is good. There is a touch of bass in the low end in terms of drum beats to give you a slight kick, but it's definitely not the most aggressive bass-heavy speaker that we've tried out. It sounds pretty well balanced, I have to say. Mids and trebles give plenty of detail when it comes to vocals and instrumentals, and doesn't distort too much at higher volume levels either. It doesn't sound too screechy or piercing, so the tuning overall I think is done quite well, which I would say is fitting of a more audiophile brand, even if this one isn't necessarily hi-fi certified. Here's also a quick demonstration of some of the other audio profiles aside from the optimal. Now switching it into party. So overall, the EQ controls do make a subtle impact. For example, in the default, it was really in the neutral position, right in the middle between all of the 4 descriptive words there, and it had a good balance to it. Versus in, again, the party mode, it definitely was a little bit more impactful in terms of bass, trying to emphasize the low end a little bit more. Again, still not going to be super earth-shattering. Versus the speech mode, definitely emphasized the vocals just a little bit more and reduced a bit of the low end and bass. So you definitely can play around with it and hear a shift in terms of the sound. It may not be quite as night and day as on larger speakers from B&O, but still is fun to play around with. Ultimately, I would say that it is a fairly well-performing compact Bluetooth speaker, and here in 2023/24, it is going to be one of the more cost-effective ways to try out one of their speakers without having to spend an arm or a leg. For a unit of its size, the overall quality is quite good. I wouldn't necessarily say it's mind-blowing, but everything is extremely clean, it's well-balanced, super clear, and packs sufficient volume as well for, again, a can-size speaker, and the companion app does make it a little easier to, again, customize some of the EQ modes. That being said, even at this price of being sub $100, I do feel like you're still paying a little bit more for the presentation. That is very good build quality, entire thing feeling quite hefty, constructed out of metal, as well as having a very interesting aesthetic and that kind of B&O branding behind it. If you like the design, just know that the sound quality is quite good, but don't expect any miracles, and it can still serve as a good alternative to other models from existing brands like Bose, Sony, Anker Soundcore, so on and so forth that are on the market, especially since, again, the street price is now getting at a point where it's actually quite competitive in that price segment. So you can check out more details if you're interested in the links down below. A pretty cool and unique looking speaker, and with overall good enough sound, that has been the B&O Beosound Explore.